All right, let's dive right into this explainer of Gustavo Adolfo Bécquer's incredibly dark and hilarious short story, Memoir of a Turkey. Today, we're going to unpack its totally unique structure, its surprising humor, and its gritty historical context rooted in 19th century realism. This isn't just some goofy story about a farm animal, you know? It's a really fascinating look at the clash between romantic ideals and brutal, everyday reality. To really unpack this, we'll peel it back layer by layer. First up, a bizarre dinner party, then the philosophical turkey, Madrid's harsh realities, a tragic, tasty conclusion, and finally, we'll look at Becker's posthumous legacy. So, part 1. A bizarre dinner party. Picture this. You're at a respectable household celebrating Easter, and a massive, perfectly roasted turkey makes a triumphant appearance on the table. Our narrator picks up the meat fork, gives the bird a vigorous stab to carve it, and instead of hitting traditional bread stuffing, he's totally stupefied to hit a greasy, rolled-up manuscript. It perfectly sets up this bizarre mystery. I mean, what kind of turkey carries official documents in its belly, right? Moving on to part 2, the philosophical turkey. So we actually step directly into that greasy manuscript found in the bird's belly. And the voice of this hidden diary is the turkey himself. And he's not just any bird. He describes living this idyllic, deeply romantic life in a rural village. He wakes up with the first rays of the sun, struts around his farmyard kingdom, and when evening rolls around by a gentle stream, he literally opens the fan of his dark feathers to recite poetry to a lady turkey who he calls the senora of his thoughts. He's just so deeply in tune with the beauty of spring, the blue skies, the sweet air, the whole shebang. And this brilliantly illustrates the story's core irony. The turkey genuinely views himself as a philosophical soul, this quote-unquote luminous speck of dust, living purely in the present moment without a care for the future. But we, the audience, know the undeniable harsh truth here. He is a farmyard bird destined to be Easter dinner. It's this grand, poetic spirit completely trapped in the body of poultry. All right, part 3, Madrid's harsh realities. That serene country life, utterly shuttered. The flock is abruptly marched through the mountains to the capital, and Becquer uses these hyper-realistic, unglamorous details to rapidly strip away all of the turkey's romantic delusions. Madrid is an absolute urban nightmare for a bird. The sun glares painfully into the alleys, there isn't a single scrap of food on the cobblestones, he's accosted by street dogs, nearly crushed by carriages, kicked by vagrants, and constantly hurried along by the sharp whack of a guide's cane hanging over him like a sword of Damocles. The turkey actually complains that he's lost at least 2 pounds from the grueling, fatiguing journey. To put that into perspective for a bird, that is a massive amount of weight. The crucial point here is that Becquer is grounding this absurd, highly philosophical narrative in very real, harsh physical suffering. The transition from a poetic soul to a starving, exhausted animal in the modern city is jarring, and it's totally intentional. Which brings us to part 4, a tragic, tasty conclusion. Things go from bad to worse. Our poor wandering bird is suddenly bought by some capricious gentleman, carried completely upside down through the confusing streets, and dumped into a shadowy, rat-filled garret for his grim final moments. First, the blood rushes to his head and he faints. Then, in a truly grotesque detail, an old woman literally force-feeds him 14 whole walnuts, shells and all, just to fatten him up. Finally, as he awaits the executioner's knife and earthen pot, this highly educated bird actually quotes Dante's Inferno, abandon all hope, knowing his beautiful feathers will soon be plucked and scattered. And with that, the diary abruptly ends, and boom, we snap back out to the dinner party for the ultimate punchline. The guests have just finished reading this harrowing, deeply moving account of a sensitive soul's destruction. They're genuinely touched. But then, pragmatically and entirely unsentimentally, they wipe their tears with their fine linen napkins and just eat the author anyway. It's a deliciously dark conclusion about the absolute indifference of society. Finally, part 5, Becquer's posthumous legacy. Stepping entirely out of the fiction for a second, we really have to look at the 19th century world that birthed this bizarre tale. You have to ask, was the author subtly using this plumed, tragic protagonist to mirror his own life? Looking at Gustavo Adolfo Bécquer's biography, it is pretty hard not to see the turkey as a stand-in for the struggling artist himself. Think about it. Much like the turkey leaving his rural valley for the capital, a 17-year-old Becquer left Seville to pursue poetry in Madrid.
And just like the bird, Madrid chewed him up. He struggled immensely, working menial day jobs as a copyist and journalist. He was actually fired from one just for doodling on the job. He was this romantic soul who ultimately couldn't survive the brutal realities of the capital, dying in relative poverty and obscurity from tuberculosis in 1870. The real kicker? It was only after his tragic death that his friends gathered his manuscripts, much like the dinner guests finding the turkey's diary, publishing his rhymes and legends, which brought him widespread posthumous fame.
So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought about the cost of art and survival. The guests crying over the turkey story right before devouring him is the ultimate irony of the artist, isn't it? Consumed by a world that only appreciates your voice and your soul once you are already gone. It really makes you wonder, what does it truly cost to feed the capital? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and stay curious.